Your children don't fit the brand image for Madison's party. My sister, Jessica, said it over the phone with the same casual precision someone uses to order a vanilla latte. No hesitation. No apology, just a clean, clinical ruling. The Azure Cove Yacht Club has a very specific aesthetic, Samantha. I have VIP guests flying in, people Andrew needs to impress. I can't have unpolished children running around disrupting the visual. My hand tightened around the granite edge of my kitchen island. It wasn't about space. It wasn't about safety. It was about curation. To her, my children weren't family. They were a branding liability. It's nothing personal, she added lightly, as if that made it generous. It's just business. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I ended the call and stared at the dark screen. I didn't yell. I didn't hurl the phone against the wall. I simply felt something dense and cold settle low in my stomach. It wasn't the insult that immobilized me. It was the logistics of the heartbreak I now had to orchestrate. My 6-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son were in the playroom down the hall, coloring birthday cards for the cousin they adored. They'd been talking about Madison's party for 3 weeks straight. Outfits had been selected, shoes had been tried on and approved. They'd practiced saying happy birthday at an indoor voice volume. And now I had to walk in there and tell them they weren't invited. I stepped into the playroom. They looked up instantly, grinning, holding up crayon masterpieces, balloons shaped like lollipops, cakes layered in impossible neon colors. I lowered myself onto the carpet and tried to keep my voice steady. Guy's plans changed, I said, forcing a smile that felt stiff and artificial. We're not going to Madison's party on Saturday. I braced for protest, for tears about cake or party favors. I had prepared myself for a meltdown. What I wasn't prepared for was the silence. My daughter slowly lowered her drawing. She didn't ask why. She didn't mention the bounce house. She just looked at me, wide-eyed, solemn beyond her years, and asked the question that would fracture my relationship with my sister beyond repair. Mommy, are we bad kids? Her voice was barely audible. Is that why Madison can't play with us? Because we're not good? The air vanished from the room. This is what people like Jessica never understand about children. Children don't comprehend capacity limits or brand consistency. To a child, exclusion is a mirror. When family closes a door, a child doesn't assume scheduling conflicts. They assume defect. They don't think Aunt Jessica is rude. They think I am unlovable. Jessica hadn't simply removed their names from a guest list. She had handed them a warped mirror and invited them to search for flaws. No, I said immediately, pulling them both against me so they couldn't read my expression. You are amazing. You are kind. This has nothing to do with you. But I felt it, the uncertainty in their small bodies, the confusion, the injury had already landed. And in that instant, my sorrow burned away, replaced by something colder, more methodical, rage, yes, but organized. That night when Matthew came home, the house was unnaturally quiet. The kids were asleep, drained from tears they tried to hide. I was sitting at the kitchen island in the dark, a glass of water untouched in front of me. Matthew stepped inside, loosening his tie. He took one look at my face and stopped. He didn't rush, he didn't interrupt, he just waited, so I told him everything. I told him about the aesthetic, I told him about the VIP investors. And then I told him what our daughter had asked. I watched him carefully. Matthew is not loud, he is not reactive, he is the kind of man whose strength lies in restraint. I expected irritation. Maybe anger. What I got instead was far more unsettling. He went completely still. He unfastened his cufflinks with slow, deliberate movements, his eyes fixed on a blank section of wall. The room seemed to drop in temperature. She said, "Brand image?" he asked evenly. "Yes," I replied. Apparently unpolished children would damage the visual for Andrew's investors. He gave one measured nod, no slammed fists, no shouting. He walked to the refrigerator, removed a bottle of water, and took a long, unhurried drink. When he turned back toward me, his expression was composed, but his eyes had shifted. They were colder. Sharper, calculating. "Okay," he said, one word, but in that single word was the finality of a judge delivering a sentence that would not be appealed. He wasn't just a husband defending his wife anymore. He was a father who had decided someone would pay for making his children feel small. And Matthew had the resources to ensure the cost was significant. The following morning, I drove to my parents' house. I wasn't seeking confrontation, I was seeking reason. Surely my mother, the woman who still displayed my kindergarten handprint in a frame, would see the insanity of excluding cousins over branding optics. I walked into their kitchen anticipating outrage. Instead, I found alignment. My mother, Patricia, was arranging hydrangeas in a glass vase. My father, James, sat at the table with the newspaper. They looked up, guarded. I didn't waste time. Did you know? I asked. Did you know Jessica uninvited the kids because they don't fit her yacht party aesthetic? My mother sighed softly, as if I were being dramatic. Samantha, honey, that word is harsh. It's accurate, I said. She told my daughter she doesn't fit the look. She's under tremendous pressure, my father said, folding the paper neatly. You don't understand the level Andrew is operating at. This isn't just a birthday party. It's strategic. He's closing a $45 million resort development. The investors will be there. I stared at them. So my children are a liability to a business deal. They're 6 and 4. They're well behaved. Since when do investors outrank grandchildren? It's not about ranking, my mother replied, smoothing a petal. It's about the bigger picture. Jessica and Andrew are building something substantial. They need this event flawless. Unpredictable elements could disrupt the atmosphere. Unpredictable elements, that's what my children were now, not family, not blood variables. You're enabling her, I said, my voice rising. You're teaching her it's acceptable to treat people like props. We're supporting her success, my father countered, his tone sharpening. And frankly, Samantha, you're being selfish. You're centering your feelings instead of celebrating your sister's ambition. Andrew is going places. We should help, not hinder. I looked around the kitchen where I grew up. The granite was the same, the oak cabinets unchanged, but the air felt thinner, harder to inhale. That's when I understood. They weren't bystanders, they were stakeholders. They had invested emotionally in Jessica's version of success because proximity to it elevated them too. They wanted to be the parents of the powerful developer's wife, the grandparents photographed at exclusive resorts. If my children's feelings were the admission fee to that world, they had already paid it without hesitation. I understand the bigger picture now, I said quietly. I left without another word. They assumed I was accepting my place, that I would quietly remain behind the velvet rope they had constructed around their curated lives. But as I slid into my car, I wasn't thinking about acceptance. I was thinking about Matthew S. Okay. My parents believed exclusivity equaled power. They believed that by narrowing their circle, they were ascending. They misunderstood the mechanics of true exclusivity. When you build walls to keep people out, you also trap yourself inside, with whatever consequences follow. Saturday arrived beneath a sky so flawless it felt mocking. The kind of blue photographers edit toward, perfect yachting weather. While Jessica was likely micromanaging linen placement and instructing servers on champagne pour angles at the Azure Cove Yacht Club, I was packing juice boxes and granola bars into a backpack. We didn't mention the party across town. We told the kids we had a surprise adventure. We took them to the city planetarium. It was deliberate. If Jessica wanted to introduce them to velvet ropes and curated guest lists, I wanted to introduce them to the universe. I wanted them to see something so vast, so infinite, that the hierarchy of a birthday party would shrink into irrelevance. Inside the domed theater, the lights dimmed. The simulated skyline dissolved into a canopy of brilliant stars. My children gasped. They reached upward as if they could pluck constellations from the dark. For one full hour, there were no VIP sections, no aesthetics, no brand narratives. There was only wonder. They were small, yes, but small in the way every human is against galaxies. Not small because an adult decided they weren't polished enough to attend a party. Still, even in the darkness, the echo of the other event lingered. I checked my watch, 2 o'clock. Guests would be arriving. Andrew would be shaking hands, flashing that polished smile, identifying which investors controlled his future. Jessica would be posing, ensuring every photograph captured perfection from the correct angle. When we stepped out of the theater, blinking against the bright afternoon sunlight, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Then it buzzed again and again. The family group chat. I didn't want to look. I knew it would hurt, but the compulsion to see the life we were barred from was too strong. Photos were flooding in, pictures of crystal flutes against the sparkling water. Pictures of my parents beaming, holding cocktails, looking every inch the proud grandparents of the chosen child, and then a photo from Jessica. It was a wide shot of the deck populated by men in linen suits and women in silk sundresses. The decor was immaculate, all white and gold, sterile and expensive. The caption reads, "So glad we kept it exclusive. The vibe is perfect. It wasn't enough to exclude us. She had to celebrate the exclusion." She had to frame our absence not as a regret, but as a design feature. Kept it exclusive. That was the dagger. She was bragging that the party was better because my children weren't there to tarnish it. I felt a shadow fall over my shoulder. Matthew was standing behind me looking at the screen. He hadn't said much all day, just watched the kids with a fierce protective intensity. Now he read the caption. He looked at the photo of the sleek, child-free deck where Andrew was holding court. He didn't frown, he didn't sigh. His face simply hardened like concrete setting. The last trace of hesitation vanished from his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. "The vibe is perfect," he repeated, his voice low and flat. It sounded less like a comment and more like an observation of a structural weakness he was about to exploit. "Let's see how long that lasts." Matthew walked away from the planetarium entrance, phone in hand. He didn't pace. He stood with his back to the wind, perfectly still like a statue carved from granite. I watched him dial a number. He didn't scroll through contacts. He typed it in from memory. I moved closer, drawn by a curiosity that outweighed my anxiety. I had never seen Matthew work. I knew he was in finance. I knew he did well, better than well, given that our house was paid off and our children's college funds were fully funded, but he never talked about it. He never brought work home. He was just Matthew, the guy who fixed the leaky faucet, who read bedtime stories, who wore the same 3 gray sweaters all winter. "This is Matthew," he said into the phone. His voice was low, devoid of warmth. "I need to confirm the financing terms for the Azure Cove project, specifically the character clause in the underwriting agreement for Andrew Sterling's development firm." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm aware of the projection numbers," he said, cutting off whoever was on the other end. "I'm looking at the ethical compliance section, paragraph 4, subsection B. Conduct detrimental to the reputation of the holding company." "Yes, that one." Another pause, effective immediately. Matthew said, "Pull the funding. Notify the partners that the primary stakeholder has lost confidence in the leadership's moral judgment and blacklist the firm from future capital rounds." "I want the email sent now." "Yes, during the event. Make sure the notification hits his inbox before the toast." He hung up without saying goodbye. He put the phone back in his pocket and turned to face me. His expression was calm, almost serene, like he had just finished a routine chore. "Matthew," I whispered, "what did you just do?" "I enforced a boundary," he said. "You pulled the funding for Andrew's resort. I own the holding company that was underwriting the loan," he said simply. "Andrew needed $45 million to break ground. He doesn't have it anymore. You own the holding company." I stared at him. "Since when?" "Since before I met you. I keep my name off the letterhead for a reason, Samantha." He walked over to me, taking my hands in his. His grip was warm and solid. "I don't hide my wealth because I'm ashamed of it. I hide it because it acts as a filter. It shows me who people really are when they think I have nothing to offer them. It shows me how they treat you when they think you're just ordinary." He looked deep into my eyes. "Andrew and Jessica failed the test. They treated our children like props because they thought we didn't matter. They thought we were powerless. They were wrong." I looked at this man, this quiet, steady man in his gray sweater, and realized I didn't just love him. I admired him. He hadn't just protected our children. He had taught them and me a lesson about true power. It doesn't roar. It doesn't need a yacht club. It waits until it is necessary, and then it strikes with absolute precision. "They're going to lose everything," I said, the reality sinking in. "They lost everything the moment they decided a brand image was worth more than family," Matthew replied. "I just formalized the transaction. I wasn't at the Azure Cove Yacht Club that afternoon, but I know exactly what happened. I know because when you humiliate a man in front of the very people he is trying to impress, the story travels faster than light. And I know because half the VIPs on Jessica's exclusive guest list were actually Matthew's subordinates, senior VPs, and directors from his holding company who had accepted the invitation out of curiosity about the new development partner." At 2:30 in the afternoon, the sun was at its peak. The champagne was flowing. The brand image was by all accounts flawless. Andrew stood on the upper deck, tapping a crystal flute with a silver spoon. He was glowing with the arrogance of a man who believes he has secured his legacy. He raised his glass. To family, he said the word, tasting like a lie in his mouth. "And to the future, as many of you know, We are on the verge of breaking ground on a $45 million resort project that will redefine luxury on this coast. To the Azure Cove expansion, there was a ripple of polite applause. Jessica stood beside him, beaming her curated perfection finally achieved. She looked out at the crowd, satisfied that she had successfully filtered out the unpolished elements of her family. Then Andrew's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He ignored it. He smiled, about to take a sip of vintage champagne. It buzzed again, long, urgent. Then to his left, his business partner's phone buzzed. Then a moment later, a wave of vibration moved through the crowd. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the synchronized hum of 50 corporate inboxes receiving a priority one notification simultaneously. Andrew frowned, annoyed by the distraction. He pulled his phone out, likely intending to silence it. He looked at the screen. The smile didn't just fade from his face, it fell off. The email was from the Centennial Group Legal Department. Subject: I immediate termination of agreement. The body of the email was short, brutal, and visible to everyone who worked for the holding company. It didn't cite market conditions. It didn't cite interest rates. It cited paragraph 4, subsection B, ethical misalignment. It explicitly stated that the financing was withdrawn due to conduct incompatible with the organization's core family values. Andrew froze. He looked up, pale and sweating. He looked at his partner, who was furiously typing on his own device, mouthing the words, "It's gone, it's all gone." But the true humiliation hadn't started yet. That began when the guests, the VIPs Jessica had sacrificed her relationship with me to impress, checked their own phones. These were men and women who reported to Matthew. They knew exactly what a priority one termination meant. It meant the person on the other end was radioactive. It meant that associating with Andrew was now a career risk. The atmosphere in the yacht club shifted instantly. It went from a celebration to a crime scene. One by one, the investors and executives put their glasses down on the white linen tables. They didn't finish their drinks. They didn't say goodbye. They simply checked the time, straightened their jackets, and walked toward the exit. "Wait," Jessica said, her voice rising in panic as she saw her meticulously curated guest list evaporating. "We haven't cut the cake yet. Where is everyone going?" Nobody answered her. They were already texting their assistants, canceling meetings with Andrew, scrubbing his firm from their contacts. In the world of high finance, silence is the loudest sound there is. Andrew stood alone on the deck, the $45 million toast dying in his throat. He looked at his phone, then at the retreating backs of his investors, and finally he understood this wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a market fluctuation. This was a sniper shot. He dialed the number for his contact at the holding company. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again, voicemail. He looked at Jessica, who was standing amidst the ruins of her perfect party, holding a cake knife like a weapon, confused and terrified. "Andrew?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's over," he whispered, staring at the empty marina. "The money, the deal, the reputation, it's all gone." At that exact moment across town, my children were laughing. Their faces sticky with ice cream pointing at the stars projected on the planetarium dome. They didn't know their aunt's party was imploding. They didn't know their uncle's career was dissolving. They just knew they were with parents who picked them, and that was the only status that mattered. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making pancakes when the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check the camera to know who it was. I could feel the desperation radiating from the front porch. When I opened the door, Jessica was standing there. She wasn't wearing her usual immaculate brand curator uniform. She was wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, her eyes red and swollen. She looked small. She looked ordinary. The velvet rope had been cut, and she was just a woman standing outside in the cold. "Samantha," she said, her voice cracking, "please." I stepped aside, not out of warmth, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see what she looked like when the filter was turned off. She walked into my kitchen, avoiding eye contact with the kids who were eating breakfast at the island. "I need to talk to Matthew," she whispered. "Matthew is at work," I said. "And even if he were here, he wouldn't talk to you. Please, Sam, you have to help me. Andrew's firm, it's over. The investors pulled out. The partners are voting to remove him. We leveraged the house for this deal. If it falls through,